Okay, I would like to. The next talk is about the astronomical journey by Dr. Akash. So he currently finished his PhD in physics in Texas University from US. He's back to Bangalore now. He's been the pioneer of VAS and also the founder member, and currently pursuing in his hobby in astronomy. And he's also built some telescopes by himself. He'll walk you through the journey, which would be really inspiring. Hope you guys enjoy. Dr. Akash, please.
Okay, so I was asked to give this talk about my journey in amateur astronomy. So even though I got my PhD in physics, the astronomy part is completely amateur. I'm a hobby astronomer. I was asked to give this talk to tie up with various fields and how you can get deeper into this hobby if you're uh, uh, interested. So I've done a little bit of astrophotography, a little bit of telescope making, but by and large, I'm a visual deep sky observer. So very little planetary observing as well. I've not done much planetary work. So, so I'm going to take you through my journey. My journey in astronomy started with a software called K-Stars. Um, and it's an astronomy software like Stellarium, the one you used today to explore the sky. So this got triggered in me because I was tinkering with Linux. I was more into computers back then than into astronomy. And I found this software on my Linux installation and started getting excited about it. And so then I started looking at the constellation patterns on the software and going up and looking at the constellation patterns. And there were all these cool names like Orion Nebula and Beehive cluster and Jewel Box cluster and all of that. And I really wanted to see these things, but I didn't have the means, no telescope, nothing. So what did I do? Well, I luckily came across a sister association here in Bangalore called the Association of Bangalore Amateur Astronomers. They've been around in here since the 1980s. They're a very old club, and they still meet regularly on Sundays. In fact, I'm giving the talk there tomorrow on my 28-inch telescope. And I joined ABBA in July 2004. This is before BIS even existed. And there's my membership card. Uh, and yeah, so at ABBA there back then was really known for telescope making. They used to know how to build 6-inch and 8-inch telescopes, sort of in the from a very different construction from what Vinay showed you earlier, but this is the basic grinding process and all was the same. So I actually ground that mirror, and I learned that I will never grind a mirror again in my life. And then uh, then finally, after about a year of effort and a lot of help from the then president of ABBA, Mr. Dilip Kumar, I finally finished this telescope. And this is a 8-inch telescope on a German equatorial mount, like a manual version of that, like we were using to view the sun earlier manually. Uh, so this was really what opened up the night sky for me. Back then we didn't have fancy ways of pointing. All we had is the tube, and all the only eyepieces we could afford were these cheap plastic eyepieces made either in China or India, but from Tejraj and company. We didn't have these nice Plausible eyepieces and so on that we have today. So whatever we had, we used to make do with. And uh, One more person at ABBA gave me this inspiration, saying, now that you've built a telescope, don't let it gather dust, because most telescopes, believe it or not, gather dust, not photons. And he said, you really should do something with your telescope now that you've built it. So I told myself I will see all 110 Messier objects within a single year of getting the telescope. So by 2006, I should be done with the Messier catalog. That was my aim. Uh, I tried to do as much as I could from the rooftop of my house. Back then, you could, in 2006, you could see the summer Milky Way, just the brightest patches from RT Nagar, which is where I lived back then. Today, it's unimaginable. But back then, you could do a little bit of deep sky work from the city. So I did do a lot of open clusters and all the bright stuff from the city. And then uh, on the right is my log. Remember, Gautam talked about people keeping logs. That is my log entry from 2005, I think, sometime late in 2005. that talks about my first trip to a dark sky site and what I saw and so on and so forth. So I have notes back from 2005. I have a dark period from 2007 to 2009 where I don't have notes, but the rest is covered. Um, so once I had this telescope, and once I met one of my observing buddies, Amar Sharma, who knew a lot of dark places. So me and Amar Sharma developed this partnership of going to our local dark site, which we had found near Dodbalapur in a village called Hosaldi. The best part is it was bus accessible, so we could leave my telescope in the government school premises there, and we would just take the bus to go and then pull out my telescope and observe, and then we'd put it back and come back by bus. So I didn't know how to drive. Even today, I can't drive in India. But because of bus access, we were able to spend at least 30 nights there. And the bonus of this place was we knew about the school because Mr. Dilip Kumar had donated a 8-inch telescope to the school. Somebody had donated it and he had made it for them. And so we also had access to the school's telescope. They'd let us use it. So sometimes we'd go there without my telescope and we'd use the school telescope and all of that. But we did a phenomenal amount of observing here. And then at that time, BAS had just started and I was heavily involved in BAS. So these are some early examples of BAS star parties where we had a banner at the back of a bus and we went places. The top one is at Yeligiri in 2006. And I was also active in my college astronomy club, the IIT Madras Astronomy Club. So that's a picture from the right. And many a time we used to meet in the middle in Yeligiri. So BAS folks would come from Bangalore and the Chennai folks would come from Chennai, and we'd meet in the middle. It was very nice that we had several star parties like that. This was 2007, 2009, and so on. Yeah, while I was at IIT Madras, I really wanted to try astrophotography. Back then, deep sky astrophotography simply was not being done by anybody other than one person, Dr. Suresh Mohan. He was probably India's first deep sky astrophotographer, as far as I know. And he lives in Chennai, so he was very close, and we learned a few things from him. I did my first planetary imaging and a little bit of deep sky with his help. And here you can see me put a DSLR to a Newtonian scope, and with my laptop, I'm trying to image. But I quickly realized imaging is not for me. There are too many technical challenges to be overcome. You see, all my stars are not round. Nothing is. The images are noisy. You know, any astrophotographer who looks at this will say that's junk. So that's where I stopped. But I was still observing. So I observed almost 250 objects with my 8-inch. And here's the list of various objects that I had, and I would check them off without much logging back then. But around that time, I was hit by aperture fever, unfortunately. So I started saturating my 8-inch, me and my friends. So we were really looking for what's next. And we found this website called Adventures in Deep Space. Okay, this has some really challenging observing projects that you can pursue for not just one lifetime but 2 lifetimes. So if you believe in reincarnation, you can try and be reincarnated as an amateur astronomer to finish all of the projects here. But there is one man who can do everything in triple speed or quadruple speed. His name is Steve Gottlieb. In his lifetime, he's 75 now. He has observed 23,800 objects, okay, and kept meticulous notes on every one of them. Okay, and he was the inspiration for us. We used to read Steve Gottlieb's notes back in 2009 on this website, and that's the guy on the right here. This is Steve Gottlieb. Yeah, we used to read his notes, and we were just fascinated by what all he had to say. He wasn't. I mean, most of us look at Andromeda Galaxy. People like Steve Gottlieb and his friends were looking at globular clusters in Andromeda galaxies, nebulae in Triangulum Galaxy. Nebulae in NGC 2403, which is some other galaxy. So those are the sort of projects that these people were doing, and we were very inspired. So we noticed that Steve Gottlieb was observing heavily with a 17.5-inch. So we decided that if I got a 17.5-inch, I would be able to see the same things, or we hoped. So that's where it started. I convinced my father to get me a 17.5-inch, and he did. It was very expensive, and he was very generous. So this was imported from California. It came, so one March in 2009, I got 3 huge boxes shipped from California. And you can see myself, my cousin, and the past president of BIS, Naveen Nanjundappa, assemble my telescope and set it up for the very first time in RT Nagar and look through it. That may have been at one of the largest telescopes in this area, that's amateur telescopes in this area back then. So we took it to a lot of BS star parties. Here's its first light, which means the first time we took it to a dark place and observed with it. This is also at Hosahalli near Dodbalapur, and it was during a BS Messier Marathon event. On the ladder is my observing friend Amar Sharma, and I will never forget the look on his face when he saw this telescope. He had no idea it was coming, and he had planned a Messier Marathon. I had given some excuse saying Messier Marathon is where you observe all 110 objects in the same night. It's possible. I've not done it. I've never succeeded. So he had planned a Messier Marathon for BAS, and he said he would observe, as many Messier objects as possible in a single night. And instead, I came up with this giant telescope later and thwarted all his plans. But he was very happy. So later in 2009, December, so that was March 2009, in December, we took this 17.5-inch telescope, which was really, really something we were amazed by, to a truly dark sky site in Coorg, So in Coorg, we took this in December. Kirti was there. I think nobody else in the audience was there. So Kirti, I, and a few others took it to Coorg, and we did all sorts of things that we never thought we would achieve. We looked at Andromeda galaxy, and we were not just able to see the galaxy as a fuzzy patch. Okay, I'll just point with my hands. So we were not able to see we were not just able to see the galaxy as a fuzzy patch like we've been describing, but we were able to see these 2 dark lanes, giving it its 3D structure, right? So we were able to see the galaxy, and we were able to see this. This is a cluster of stars in the Andromeda galaxy. We were able to see it, okay? And we also later found a globular cluster in Andromeda galaxy. So globular cluster 2.2 million light years away. So we saw all of that for the first time. We also started seeing structure in galaxies. So there were no longer these faint fuzzy patches to us. We started seeing spiral arms, and that's one of the toughest Messier objects in the center. And we were seeing spiral arms in it. And Horsehead Nebula, we have discussed it many times. It's good photographically. It is very challenging to observe visually. And we were also able to finally observe that. So lots of dreams came true in December 2009 with the 17.5-inch. So after that, I had to move to the US for my PhD. So my time with the 17.5-inch was short-lived. Maybe I used it for like 10, 15 nights, where we used it heavily at all BIS events. There used to be a lineup at the 17.5-inch and all of that. But I moved to Texas, so I left the 17.5-inch here. I had no idea how to drive. There's no, Uber is there, but there's no intercity. You can't just take a driver and go to the dark sky site in the US. So learning to drive was a prerequisite. So that had blocked my progress in astronomy for a while. I also didn't have a telescope. I lived in an apartment. I still do live in an apartment. And managing a telescope, a big job in a big telescope in an apartment is hard. But yeah, I luckily met this person on an online forum on the right. His name is John Tatarchuk. He's not very active in astronomy right now, but he had a 25-inch telescope. And he's not a dwarf. The telescope is really that big. Yeah, he took me out. Various generous people took me out to my first dark sky site almost like 2 months after I landed in the US. And I also met him. He was a student at my university. And I observed many nights with him and his 25-inch, and he taught me a lot. So we developed an observing partnership that was very fruitful. And he also sold me his old 18-inch for a very good price. So he had upgraded from 18 inches to 25 inches. By the way, when I say 18 inches, by now I hope it's clear, it's the aperture, the size of the light gathering bucket, if you like. And so it's 18 inches diameter, the mirror, right? And yeah, I also learned to drive eventually. And this picture is at an observing site in Central Texas, which was very, very good. I missed that site. It was really, really dark. So some BAS members also have migrated to the US. So there is really a joking group that I started called BAS California chapter, but it seems more and more serious every month. Uh, so uh, so Hemant, the founding president of BAS, happened to also move to Texas, and I didn't know how to drive back in 2012 still, and he knew how to, and he drove us to Texas Star Party. He, his wife, and me, and this is his astrophotography setup and my 18-inch, and that's him hiding behind. I don't know what it is. It's too, back then phones were not, or cameras were not good at exposure. But yeah, we had to learn a lot in this trip. We had to learn how to camp, cook vegetarian Indian food in the middle of some ranch in Texas. And thankfully, Hemant and Jaya figured all of that out for me, and I could just observe. Uh, so this is me with my telescope there, and that's my logs. I got to see a lot of cool things for the first time. The spiral arms in the galaxies were just incredible because of how good the sky was. This would back then be considered one of the best skies in the country of the of USA. So it was really good, and I could go very deep with my 18-inch. Um, Now, 2 years later, another interesting thing happened. Of course, I talked about my experiences of Texas Star Party on BAS and others. And a 14-year-old BAS member decided to come to the US specifically to attend Texas Star Party. So in his visa interview, he said that I'm going to go and go to a star party. And the visa officer said, "What? You're going to Hollywood stars in having a party, and you're 14, you can't even drink?" He said, "No, no, no. This is an astronomy event." And then they asked him about some astronomy questions just to make sure he's telling the truth. And they quickly granted him his visa. So that's the story. And there he is. There's Santosh, and also there. And in the bottom right, he's actually standing with two of the best visual observers of the world, who are very. The person on the right is living. The person on the the person on the left is living, and the person on the right, Barbara Wilson, she's no more. But they are really good visual observers, some of the best. And everyone loved Santosh. They thought it was crazy that 14-year-old from India would travel to Texas specifically for Texas Star Party. And so he got all the gifts, everything that people won in the lucky draw that they didn't want became Santosh. But Santosh did something really good for me, and he pestered me to message a person who lived near Texas Star Party who had a 48-inch telescope. 48-inch, 1 meter, actually 1.2 meters or something. It's bigger than the one of the telescopes at Cavalur Observatory. Okay, gigantic telescope, personal, amateur. Okay, so I ended up messaging him for Santosh's sake, and he thought it was cool too that a kid would come all the way from India, and he had also read my observing notes on various forums, and he said, "Come over." So we did, and that's me standing on his ladder. I don't know how tall his ladder is, and that is his telescope. Yeah, and the first night there was cloudy. So he just showed us Saturn through the clouds and said, "Well, it was cloudy tonight, so you can come back tomorrow night." And we were jumping, okay? So both of us went back the next night, and the night was clear. And my goodness, we saw some really cool things. Hoax object, a ring galaxy, 7 Zwicky 466. Have you even heard of a catalog called Zwicky? Okay, so there's like really cool objects that we ended up seeing through that 48-inch. And that fostered a friendship between me and Jimmy Lowry that lasts till today. We are very close friends. And I'm very fortunate. It's been a very good observing relationship and also friendship outside of astronomy. And I'm very fortunate that I got to observe through that beautiful instrument almost 30, 40 nights by now. It's really an amazing instrument. Anyway, when I visited in May 2014, Jimmy Lowry told me that your hero Steve Gottlieb is coming here in October. I said, "Can I come?" Okay, and yes, he said, "Yes, you can come." And I drove 7 hours for, without thinking, to go and observe with Steve Gottlieb. So I finally met Steve Gottlieb, who had been my inspiration and mentor through the internet. And we had a very good time observing. We observed one of the most cool things we observed that day was a shell galaxy, where there are shells and some really interesting structures in it. It's a very cool galaxy. And then I learned a lot from Steve and Jimmy, and that's a BS t-shirt I'm wearing. Okay, anyway, so in the intervening years, almost 10 years since all of this, I made many observations over the years through my 18-inch and also through Jimmy's 48-inch. And I keep logs like this. This is my spreadsheet where I say when I observed what and what I've observed. There's about 1,500 entries there, but the total number of objects is higher because some of these are like galaxy clusters and things like that. Okay, so now I'm going to switch gears and talk about recent times. So this was a cool observing trip that we took to the Nevada desert. I later upgraded my vehicle because I realized that carrying a big telescope and even bigger telescope requires even bigger vehicle. So aperture fever doesn't make you just buy big telescopes, it also makes you buy big vehicles, so beware. So it started out, so I had an observing trip to the Nevada desert, which is very barren. I think the nearest city must have been 200 kilometers, and the nearest small settlement must have been about 70, 80 kilometers from where we were. So really no cell signal, no water, no toilets, nothing. We had to carry everything in and dig holes in the ground. Literally, yes, I'm not joking. So there's only one other person that's crazy enough to do, no, there are few people who are crazy enough to do this with me, but there's one person who is also ready to do it in 5 minutes, and that is a guy from Mangalore named Tarun Kotari. So he came with me, and he's an astrophotographer, landscape. He took this beautiful picture. And what I'm doing there is I'm doing a 2-hour exposure with my eyes on something that you'll see in the next frame. So that's the result of the 2-hour exposure with my eyes. So just like they told you that in imaging, you have to integrate over really long times. In visual observing, it's not integration, but you have to observe over really long times to get all the details. So I was exposing Whirlpool Galaxy with my eyes and sketching, taking notes. Almost everything was unprompted by an image, except I think this detail. I had to look at an image and then look into the eyepiece and said, oh yeah, it's there. So some of my trips like that are vlogged on my YouTube, which you can look at. They're not very good vlogs, and I stopped doing editing videos after a certain point. Okay, so that's one recent trip. The other recent thing that has happened is I did it again. I fell prey to aperture fever again, and I went from an 18-inch telescope to a 28-inch telescope. Thankfully, I got a good price on the mirror because my friend Jimmy Lowry, the same person with the 48-inch, he sold me his old 28-inch telescope. And it lacked one component. It lacked this component, which everything rests on. So unlike Vinay, I didn't have to do any calculations for truss tube lengths, and so those were all figured out. The mirror was done. Most of the structure was done. I just had to create this one thing. But I have very little DIY experience. So I had two great friends helping me. So here you can see one of them. He's very experienced in making telescopes. So so you can see there we are testing the movement and trying to align the bearings on which the telescope rides. And there I'm actually manually filing a bit of a plate that attaches my focuser to the telescope. But in the end, we had 3 weeks to finish this project, and in 3 weeks, we restored that telescope and took it to a star party. I have now used the telescope for only 5 nights, so I'm really looking forward to using it more. The problem with the telescope is it weighs about 150 kgs total, and the heaviest component weighs about 75 kgs, so I need 2 other people to help me lift it. That needs to change. I need to be able to go observing alone, and that's what I'm working on. So the views through that 28-inch are incredible, especially Swan Nebula, Whirlpool Galaxy, and Hercules Cluster. Swan Nebula was very, very mind-blowing. Eagle Nebula, Pillars of Creation, mind-blowing. I never expected the jump from an 18 to 28 inch to be that large, but it is. So I'm very excited to use this telescope more. In around August, more recently, I published an article in the Sky and Telescope magazine, October 2024 issue, which Shashi has kindly put up for you to see. My request is please do not take photographs of it. That's instructions from from copyright law basically. So please respect that. But you can read the article. I also happened to summon the courage to put my own sketch of Rosette Nebula, which, of course, when you sketch something, you're always like, is this good enough? I don't think it's good enough, but I submitted it anyway. I took a lot of inspiration and support from Howard Banich, whose sketches you've seen before in the visual observing talk. So that's it. What are my future ideas? I won't leave astronomy yet. I have another Sky and Telescope article coming up. I hope to motorize the 28-inch and make the 28-inch a one-person operation and do more observations with it. And those are links to my work. On the left is my website, which has my talk, slides, videos, whatever. On the right is Adventures in Deep Space, the website that inspired me. I ended up becoming the webmaster of it, so now I have the chores of putting up observing logs and so on it. So I also have some writings on Adventures in Deep Space now. So that's it. The reason I was asked to give this talk is to connect up what a journey of an amateur astronomer looks like, given all that you've heard technical stuff from the morning. So hopefully it's been useful.
We have an internal bet that Akarsh is going to upgrade to 40-inch pretty soon. Maybe in years we have a little bet going on.
No.
We are going to win it.
No, I've kept my 18-inch for 12 years. No, 13 years almost. So, so 28 should last much longer. Okay. Should I? Do I have time for questions? Okay, I can maybe take questions for 5 more minutes. Okay.
Akash, really thank you for this talk. I hope some of the participants and students take something out of it and start doing the same kind of logging and experiment in astronomy and visual astronomy like we did. So if you guys have any questions to him, we might take a couple of questions, so please shoot it. So
There's some question there.
I can see two of the hands, please. You guys have any questions? Okay, even if you do have any questions, he's sticking around for some more time. You can just walk up to him and ask him questions. So I also wanted to thank Akash because he's not just into visual astronomy, but he's also a co-developer for K-Stars. That's an Linux-based planetarium software, just like how you saw Stellarium. That's being co-built with his one. And he's also written multiple, what do you say, blogs that you can follow. You'll be really inspired to see that the conditions that these guys go through, anybody for doing an astronomy and how they did it. So you will be able to get, okay, some idea like, okay, this is what you're going to do and this is what we are going to get. And at the end results of what you